director Brian Volk-Weiss. Is it Brian? Is it Volk-Weiss or Weiss?
If we're in Germany, it's Weiss. If we are in the United States of America, it is Weiss.
Weiss. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us here on the Film Threat Livecast. I've watched the first 2 episodes of this series and am blown away.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I thought I knew everything about Star Wars. I've read,
Me too.
yeah, The Secret History of Star Wars. I read and here's my complaint about any sort of Star Wars. When you do a documentary about Star Wars, there's a lot of like behind the scenes on the disc. They're all the same. It's all this stirring Star Wars music. It's an interview with George Lucas who says, special effects are just a tool to tell a story. That same quote he says, and it's almost, there's like a sameness about the way the story of Star Wars and the making of it has been told. You threw all that out the window. You interviewed for this documentary John Dykstra, other legends, the guy, why am I spacing out his name? The guy who made all the creature masks for the cantina scene.
Oh, Rick Baker.
Rick Baker. How would I forget that? And then you got in an interview, she has not been interviewed for I don't know how many decades.
Marcia, it's her first on-camera interview ever, and it's technically her second. She did a interview with a Northern California newspaper 46 years ago. That's it.
So Marcia Lucas was integral to the success of Star Wars, obviously George Lucas's wife and editor, and I would argue creative collaborator. Things about, I really want to talk to you about this, but there's so many things that I didn't know, like how much the movie was changed in the editing even to make sense, or the pressures on George Lucas, to basically say, hey, we're out of money. Why don't you just end the movie when they rescue the princess? They rescue the princess, they go off into the sunset, movie's over. I never knew that, among other things. So can you tell me, my first question to you, and we're going to go, I don't know how long we have you for, but we're going to go to questions in the chat. How did you get Marcia Lucas to agree to be in this documentary series?
So as you said, since Toys That Made Us, we've basically been making docs like this for about, if you include production, we've been doing this for 6 years. And what I've learned, having produced a lot of series like this and directed, is it is so random who says yes quickly and who says yes slowly. Sigourney Weaver, for the Movies That Made Us, Aliens episode, got her like that, no problem. It took us about 6 months to get the second AD of A Nightmare Before Christmas to say yes. So not Nightmare Before Christmas, sorry, Nightmare on Elm Street. So they were both nightmares. So it was the way it happened with Marcia, and this is actually much more common than you may think. We were interviewing, I believe, Richard Edlund, and at the end of the interview, he was all happy, and which that is so important, that the people you're interviewing enjoy the interview, because he afterwards was like, who do you got? Who do you not got? And I was like, the number one person that I want that we don't have is Marcia Lucas. And he was like, well, who are you talking to? And I gave him the 2 names we had. And he was like, no, you got to talk to her agent. Her assistant. So took about 2 weeks of back and forth. And one morning I woke up, I was scheduled to go to New York at 3:00. And I woke up to an email where she had said yes. And she also said, I'm available tomorrow and for the next 9 days. And with someone like Marcia Lucas, you kind of pretend they don't say in the next 9 days. All I heard was tomorrow. I canceled my trip to New York. This was conservatively 30 meetings that had to be rescheduled and pushed back 6 weeks. And I flew to Hawaii at 2:00. And then interviewed her for 6 hours the next day.
It's an incredible interview. I could have just seen her being interviewed, unedited, just because I think it's so momentous. I think that I don't know that her contribution's ever been diminished, but I think it may have been forgotten. And what surprised me was how much she pushed back against George. For example, there's a cut of the movie, but that George kind of supervised, but it was mostly kind of push the humor. She's like, George, you have to take it seriously. Got to dial back on the humor. And another thing that really struck me, which was interesting, it was Marcia Lucas's suggestion to kill off Obi-Wan Kenobi. Originally, they just escape with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's at the Rebel Command Center, on Yavin. Like it's amazing, like her suggestions, how right they were, how much they made Star Wars. In addition, Luke was originally supposed to make 2 runs down the Death Star trench. The first one using the computer, the second run not using the computer, with Obi-Wan Kenobi in the voice in his cockpit, like he was on Yavin, telling him like, use the Force, But it's like so many critical choices. Even the moment when Han Solo says, woohoo, right? Like when he comes and kind of helps Luke, right? Like that moment, she said, if that moment works, the whole movie works. She was right. I can't even imagine like being in a room with her. I would probably freeze when it comes to questions to ask. But what I love about this series is it totally solidifies like her place in Star Wars history. I haven't seen the whole series. I've only seen the first 2 episodes. It's available on currently, is it Vice TV?
Yes.
So it's on Vice TV. So just like however you have to see it on Vice TV, just see it. It's there. First episode is live now.
Yeah, and it plays every Tuesday.
That's right.
How many episodes are there?
There's 6 episodes, and
Okay.
you said a lot of things that are really, really interesting. And one of the things, sadly, I do want to say to you is keep watching the show, because respectfully, if you feel like she was not diminished, let's talk about that after you finish episode 6. She was, in my opinion, based on what I've read and what she said, undeniably diminished. So I would start with that. But it's so funny you brought up the trench run. I remember watching Phantom Menace, having no idea what you just said about the trench run was the way it was. And I'm sitting there watching Phantom Menace, and I'm like, are we going to really watch him drive around 3 times? Like, I'm literally like sitting there in the theater being like, we saw that mountain. Like, why are we doing this 3 times? So, and I would actually be honest with you, like, I think part of the reason I only saw Phantom Menace once in the theater was because of stuff like that, where I'm like, I cannot sit there through a 3-lap pod race. And then you have the exact same thing going on with A New Hope, and you see Marsha's contribution in one situation and her not being around in the other situation. And forgetting about my own opinion, go on Amazon, go on IMDb, whatever, you will see A New Hope is much more favorably reviewed than Phantom Menace. And I really think you can make the argument her contribution gave a soul to Star Wars. Just so you know, I'm not one of these 46-year-olds that hates the prequels. I like most, not all of it, but for a 46-year-old, I think I have a better opinion of the prequels than most people. And I really do love Revenge of the Sith. But what she did was, like I said, she gave a soul to Star Wars. But to answer your other question, here's the best way I can explain to you what a 6-hour interview with Marcia Lucas was like. I get out of the interview. Like I said, it was 6 hours. I get in the car. Her house was about an hour away from where I was staying. I missed at least 7 or 8 phone calls during the interview. And I conservatively had between 250 and 350 emails that came in during those 6 hours. My personality, not to mention texts, by the way. So my personality, I want to get stuff done. I want to get stuff done. Any situation like that, I would be on my phone returning calls. If I had an iPad with me, I'd be doing emails and calls, like whatever. I sat there for the hour drive back to the hotel, just staring out the window at like the mountains and the trees. I was so just a word I don't use often. This might even be the first time I have ever used this word in a regular sentence. Flabbergasted. like I've been hit by a train.
Is there any chance that we could see like the full unedited interview? I feel like there could just be a documentary. You could make a separate documentary, just call it Marcia, because there've been a lot of things about I like her. She didn't just contribute to Star Wars. She was integral to the success of other filmmakers, Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and what you mentioned about Phantom Menace reminds me of something from the Secret History of Star Wars. There's no tension in that pod race scene 3 laps. Why? We know Anakin lives. What is the tension? What are the stakes? Why does it matter? I mean, it's okay, don't get me wrong. It's a very cool sequence. It's a very cool action sequence that doesn't matter. The interesting thing that Lucas did, at least when he had Marsha around during the making of The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas thought to himself, okay, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are going to have a lightsaber battle. No one in the audience is going to believe that you would kill off Luke, the protagonist, the lead character of the story.
Yes.
So there's no tension. That's why so much of the sequel trilogy lightsaber duels are irrelevant, don't matter. There's no tension. In particular in Rise of Skywalker, why do they keep fighting? What's at stake? Why does this matter? What George Lucas thought was, okay, the audience is not going to believe that Darth Vader would kill Luke, but they might believe that Luke could be turned to the dark side.
Yes.
And that's what he made the duel about in Empire Strikes Back, was about Luke potentially turning to the dark side. That's what it was about.
And
so,
sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So it's interesting. You're saying something leading up to a theory that I've had for about 10 years. Lucas figured out how to make the prequel era interesting. He figured out the solution to the problem, but he figured it out 10 years too late. Or I don't know the time. It could have been 5 years too late. There was one decision, which may not have been possible, but there was one thing he could have done that if it started at the beginning of Phantom Menace, I think those 3 movies would have made at least another $1 billion. And even though we didn't know who she was, imagine if Phantom Menace opens something connected to Ahsoka Tano. Because what Ahsoka Tano did, and I saw it happen in real time. I'm watching Clone Wars because I love Star Wars, but I'm not really enjoying Clone Wars that much. Like, it's fun, it's good, but I'm like, whatever. But the moment for me when Clone Wars becomes Clone Wars, which I am now obsessed with, was this moment, I believe, please don't kill me if I'm wrong, at the end of season 4, may have been season 3, but at the end of season 4, there's an episode, it's a 2-parter, where Ahsoka gets stuck on a planet where they're basically like capturing slaves and like training slaves to like be slaves or something. And she works with other Jedi and escapes. And over the 2 episodes, Anakin is racing around the universe like a lunatic trying to find her. And at the end of the episode, 3 things happen, which are great. Number 1, she don't need saving. She saves herself. Number 2, Anakin does find her, and you really, for the first time, see how important they are to each other. And more importantly, how important she is to him. And then number 3, most important, there is this moment. It's literally the last thing you see before it goes to credits. Da, 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 whatever. That was not the song. Apologies, but I cannot do a good job on the song. You see on the landing dock of the building, Mace and Yoda are watching Ahsoka and Anakin walk into the building, and they give each other this look. And you realize, or at least I did, that they get it. They get it. They get that they messed up with Anakin. And they have put Ahsoka into his life to get him back to the light side. They're having the dreams. They're having, like, they know what's coming. They know Gon Quinn messed up. So what Clone Wars becomes after that, it fixed the problem of the prequel films in that we know Anakin's going down in the lava. We know he's not savable. We know he's going to die and become Darth Vader. But we don't know what's happening with Ahsoka. So what Clone Wars for me became after that moment is Ahsoka going to become a Sith or a Jedi? And then, of course, when she resigns at the end of season 5, if that was going on during the original movies, those films would have made another $1 billion, because she becomes what you're wondering about, if she's salvageable or not. And as the show unfolds, as you know, you think she's heading towards becoming a Sith for a while. And it was only truly in Mandalorian, I would argue not even Rebels, where you see that she did embrace becoming a Jedi. And that's what the prequels were missing, because we already knew the ending. And that's why I never subscribed to the hatred for Jar Jar. Jar Jar would have worked for everybody. By the way, you talk to anybody under 35 right now, they love Jar Jar. We can never forget that. Yeah, like Jar Jar was not the problem. Yes, he was in Phantom Menace too much, sure. But he was not the real problem. The problem was you needed some sense of will she, won't she, or will he, won't he, whoever. And you didn't have that with any of the characters, especially after the fact when the only new character gets, killed at the end of the first prequel. I will shut up now. Sorry. I get very
No, it's great. I will say this. I agree with you about Jar Jar. I remember just hearing about how awful Jar Jar was, then finally seeing the Phantom Menace and going, well, he didn't bother me that much. I think the problem with Jar Jar is simply screen time. That's it. It's screen time. He has way too much screen time. And if you look at like what the hero's journey is, the only character in the Phantom Menace that follows the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, is Jar Jar. He leaves his home, returns a conqueror. He actually follows the hero's journey. And I think it's because Lucas was obsessed with Jar Jar and making that work. Jar Jar needed to be C-3PO in small doses.
Yes, I've been saying that for years.
If Jar Jar was in small doses, even when they meet him and he's like this creature and Qui-Gon Jinn kind of like is dismissive of him, a local, it's funny, like that stuff really worked. But again, it's if Marcia Lucas was there, the prequels would have been better. If Marcia Lucas was there during the sequels, did you see that quote from, I think it was Bob Iger's book about Marcia Lucas talking about Kathleen Kennedy?
Yeah.
Please look up that quote, Alan, if you wouldn't mind. My colleague Alan Ing is here. There's a quote that Marcia Lucas gave and was basically like, hey, Kathleen Kennedy, call me. Like she basically called out Kathleen Kennedy for not understanding what Star Wars is. And apparently Marcia Lucas was devastated when the prequels came out. I don't even know if she's seen the sequels, but she does. Disney doesn't. I just think that and we talk about this a lot on the Film Threat YouTube channel. There are creative visionaries. George is one. Marcia Lucas is one. Gene Roddenberry was one. There's so many. Peter Jackson is a creative visionary. I don't think a corporation can make a franchise. I just don't think they can. They have proven again and again, companies are not capable. Now, people are. Christopher Nolan can reinvent Batman in a way, right? Like certain creative visionary filmmakers, a Zack Snyder, whatever you think of the Snyderverse, okay, he's a creative visionary who took a risk, took the DC universe in a certain direction, creative visionary. Corporations cannot do that. Too many cooks, it's incapable. Many people are dissatisfied about Star Wars, and it really, I think, has become, it's just too many corporate cooks is what I'm saying. But Marcia was there from the beginning. Do you have that quote, Alan? Could you share it?
Yeah, it's coming up.
I'll read the quote. I like Kathleen Kennedy. I always liked her. She was full of beans. That sounds like something.
She loves that expression. She said that in 6 hours I interviewed her. I think she said that 5 or 6 times.
She was full of beans. She was really smart and really bright, really wonderful woman. And I liked her husband, Frank. I liked them a lot. Now that she's running Lucasfilm and making movies, it seems to me that Kathy Kennedy and J.J. Abrams don't have a clue about Star Wars. They don't get it. And J.J. Abrams is writing these stories. When I saw that movie where they kill Han Solo, I was furious. I was furious when they killed Han Solo. Absolutely positively, there was no rhyme or reason to it. I thought, you don't get the Jedi story. You don't get the magic of Star Wars. Mm-hmm. You're getting rid of Han Solo, Lucas says in the book. That's a quote from, sorry, is it?
Marcia.
I forget. Yeah, Marcia Lucas's quote from that book.
Yeah, it's from Howard Kazanjian's Producer's
Life. I'm sorry, I mixed it up. But to me, yeah, she just doesn't get it. It's just so disheartening. I really wish
that. I have to say, and again, I know dangerous, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't want to just keep my mouth shut. And I know it's not popular to defend Disney on this topic, but I will. To me, I'm all about compare and contrast. I'm a big believer in you can't judge something without looking at the context around that something. Mm-hmm. And you can't make movies like Star Wars and TV shows like The Mandalorian without a studio. You can't. Like Boba Fett, which was, I think, the cheapest show they've done so far. I mean, that was probably $100 million. So we need a studio to do what they're doing. That to me is Exhibit A. Exhibit B, I love Batman. I love James Bond. Holy cow, had there been some bad Batmans and some bad James Bonds. It's a quality control issue that every company has. You can't operate at a high quality all the time, every time, simultaneously. To me, I view this topic with Star Wars as comparable to pizza. Yes, there is bad pizza. A lot of people say there's no such thing as bad pizza. Those people, I don't agree. Let me put it nicely. There's absolutely bad pizza. But it's worth having the bad pizza for the great pizza. So do I love everything Kathleen Kennedy has done? Absolutely not. Would Kathleen Kennedy be shocked to learn that a Star Wars fan does not love everything she's done? Absolutely not. You can't operate with that volume on such a public scale and not make Book of Boba Fett. But I would argue, going back to the pizza thing, it's worth the bad Star Wars to get Rogue One. Like everybody loves blaming Kathleen Kennedy for whatever the second JJ film was called, which I think is an F-. The Last Jedi.
Rise of Skywalker.
No, the second one.
Last Jedi.
Last Jedi. Yeah. So do I think Last Jedi is an F-? Yes, I do. But I'd rather have Rogue One, and I know a lot of people don't agree with me, but I love Solo. I think Solo is fantastic. So I'm okay getting The Last Jedi if I can also get a Rogue One versus not getting any Rogue One. She never gets credit for Rogue One, but she gets beaten up all the time for Last Jedi. She gets no credit for Mandalorian, and she gets beat up all the time for Book of Boba Fett. And it's not, forget about it being fair or not. It's business. She's well paid. She doesn't care what we think, and nor should she. But you can't avoid misses. You just can't.
Well, Brian, you're definitely going to get that Kathleen Kennedy interview now, I think. But look, I do think that there are filmmakers who are very good at dealing with studios. I think Christopher Nolan.
Sorry to interrupt. Or assassinated.
Right. Well,
yeah.
Right. Well, I would say Christopher Nolan is one of the best. He knows how to play the studio where he gives the studio what they want, but he also gets what he wants. There are filmmakers that have the weight that can do that. And I think that when when you're hiring a director, that's the visionary. You want to be behind that visionary. We can have the Kathleen Kennedy discussion another time. I disagree with a little bit of what you said, but
and I respect that.
But that's fine. It's fine. But I will say this: I did see the leaked Mandalorian season 3 trailer, or what they showed at Star Wars Celebration. It actually looks It actually looks like real Star Wars to me. It was shot with a home, just like someone had their phone and got footage. And I was like, I kind of want to see that. Yeah. I'm being honest. Boba Fett was, I didn't finish it.
But I will make this point, and again, you may not agree with me, and I respect everything you think, because obviously we're just talking about opinions, but Christopher Nolan, Batman 3 is awful. Nobody likes to bag on it. It is a terrible movie. And he did exactly what always happens to almost everybody. Mm-hmm. He was exhausted. He put out a rough cut. There was a better movie in there, first of all. But that last thing he put out, he's lucky COVID was going on, because everybody's blaming COVID. I don't know what the hell was going on in that movie. I have tried to sit through it a second time. So Christopher Nolan, who I think I agree with you, because it seems like you're a fan of his.
Yeah.
I think he's one of the greatest directors in the history of cinema. Absolutely. I think his second Batman movie should be in the Smithsonian. I think it is one of the greatest. I think it is the aggregate of human knowledge for filmmaking. But yeah, that last film he did, that was a disaster. I don't know what the hell was going on there.
There's so much more I want to ask you about this, but the chat has blown up, and I hope you can stick around with us for a while. People have questions for you. This is a live interview on YouTube. I don't know if you were told that.
I was. By the way,
good.
It's not that impressive that I was told. It's extremely impressive that I remembered.
Okay, good. Even better. You're a busy man, but we'll get to some of the comments and questions here for Brian. John Witchboy says, Marsha. There you go.
That's very profound and accurate.
Patrick Lemire says, release the Marcia Lucas cuts.
I think we will. I think we will put the whole interview out. I really do.
I think there's a separate documentary that you could make, just a documentary about her, her life, her contribution to cinema, and where it's only Marsha. I really, now our friend of the show, Kevin Rubio, which Kevin, friend of mine for years, great guy, writer, did Troops. Also, Kevin, talk to me. We want you to be part of we're doing a mock trial of Star Wars. We're putting Lucasfilm and Disney on trial for the murder of the Star Wars franchise. It's all in good fun. We have people arguing both sides of the argument, because I want to bring people together who disagree, and I want them to debate respectfully. And Kevin, thank you so much for your $10 and support of the show. Kevin Rubio's question is, I contend that Marsha may be the reason that we will never get a release of the original films, because she would share in those profits. Brian, thoughts?
I'll be completely honest with you. I never heard that logic until earlier this week when it came up on another show I was on. And I've never heard that before. I highly doubt that's true. Knowing what I know about him. And the other thing, spoiler alert, you will see in the either the third or the sixth episode of our series, Marcia does say, I mean, she gets money every year from the 3 original films. So she's getting paid. So maybe she's getting 15 million a year instead of 18 million a year. But George Lucas, who I truthfully can say I've met, but it was for about 11 seconds. So I don't know the guy. But based on the guy I've been reading about and listening to what Marcia said about him, and Howard Kazanjian and Roger Christensen, I feel like George Lucas has an interesting relationship with money. I think that he understands money is needed to do what he did, but I also think he doesn't care about money. I think he cares about creative control and efficiency, and he doesn't want studio notes. He doesn't want to be told what to do. He keeps his own counsel, as they say. So I think if George thought that, and this is all conjecture, but I think if George thought that the best thing for Star Wars was to put out the original films, and he would have to pay Marcia a little extra, I believe he would have done it. But I don't know. My official answer is I have no idea. It's an interesting question.
Plus, that decision is no longer in George's hands.
That's a great, I'm going to steal that from you. That's now my first answer. That's the best answer.
Okay.
One question I have is the way you painted how you got the interview with Marcia was you just called her and asked her. Was there a sense that she never spoke because no one asked her, or do you feel like this was the time for her and that she needed to get all this off her chest?
It's a great question, because you're focused on something that a lot of people don't understand, and I would have never understood had I not been doing this. But a lot of it is timing, man. I'll tell you a really interesting fact. So we did a show. It's horrible. Please don't watch it. It's not my fault, but we did a really bad show for History Channel about 6 years ago about the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. Then last year, we made a series about the 55th years of Star Trek. And that was 10 episodes. And I could actually do what I wanted to do, unlike the 50th. There were people we interviewed for the 50th that would not talk to us for the 55th. And there were two reasons for almost everybody saying no who we already knew. Reason number one, for some reason, I'll tell you what happened. What happened was when we were shooting for the 50th, there had been no new Star Trek made other than the movies in, 20 years. By the time we were doing the 55th, Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks had already been airing. The Janeway thing was coming, and Strange New Worlds was coming. So all of these actors and producers who had not been interviewed much, all of a sudden were working again and were getting interviewed, and they were just sick of talking about Star Trek. Then the other reason was they were working on Star Trek, and they either didn't have the time, or they were like, listen, I'm working for Paramount again. I'm not supposed to talk about this stuff. So to your point, getting people to say yes really is timing. I think there is, statistically speaking, a phenomenal chance that if we had gone to Marcia a year earlier or a year later, she would have said no.
Let's get to more comments and questions from people watching live here. Pat the Batman fan says, George Lucas is like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. They just want to be seen as a lone genius. Reading the Lucas biography, I liked Marsha more than George, says Ian Cannell. Legally Curated says, female perspective added by Marcia Lucas made it a masterpiece. I do think that, like, sometimes people get turned off when you think of like strong female lead now. That's because it's become such a cliche, but it's also like turning the female characters, basically just putting them in a male, like they're just doing what a man would do, which doesn't make sense. I think that's what makes Carrie Fisher's performance as Princess Leia so amazing, like from the beginning. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, man. And unfortunately, it's a dark thought. I don't think that's what the problem is. The problem is that women, for whatever reason, get erased from history a lot. Or even if they don't get erased, they don't get the spotlight for whatever reason. There's usually reasons. And I'll give you an example. I did this last year with our Star Trek show, The Center Seat, where I've been reading books my whole life about Star Trek. I'm one of those weirdos that like Star Trek and Star Wars equally. Anytime you read a book about the making of Star Trek, the books give Lucille Ball a lot of credit for being the mother of Star Trek. The documentaries made about Star Trek never give her recognition. And again, if I'm being honest, and I'm sure women listening to this will disagree with me, and they would have every right to, in my opinion, it wasn't that they were not shining a spotlight on Lucille Ball because they were sexist or because they didn't like Lucille Ball. They had a limited amount of time, and it's just easier to cover stuff that's already been covered. And Gene Roddenberry was the guy who came up with the name Captain Kirk. He was the guy who created Spock and Vulcans. The best way I've ever heard it said was the opening preamble from Quantum Leap, where he says, to make right where once went wrong. And my entire life of watching Star Trek documentaries, it drove me insane that everybody's calling Gene Roddenberry the father of Star Trek and nobody's calling Lucille Ball the mother of Star Trek. So when I got the chance to make my own documentary about Star Trek, that was literally, I mean, the opening episode is called Lucy Loves Star Trek. Like, it was very important to right that wrong, that she got no credit. And she was very hands-on. Now, again, she didn't name the characters. She didn't write the script, but she wrote the check. And not only did she write the check, she wrote the check twice. Because as most people know about Star Trek, the pilot was not picked up initially. They gave it a second chance. Both times, Lucille Ball wrote the check. And by the way, Arnaz was long out of the picture that time. So there's no Star Trek without Lucille Ball. With this, with Star Wars and Icons on Earth, it's the same thing, but with Marcia. And we get into this a lot in the 6th episode, by the way. Marcia was literally erased. And it might be easy to be angry at George Lucas or people like that for erasing her. But if I'm to give him a pass, for lack of a better expression, they were married. They had a brutal divorce. She, again, different people say different things, but regardless, he had his heart torn out. He loved her. He worshiped her. So do I think listen, I know for a fact there are many people in the Star Wars universe for 50 years. He does not like those people, but he kept hiring them. He kept talking to them. He kept letting them do press on behalf of Star Wars, and he just lived with it. I can say his name because he's dead. George Lucas despised David Prowse. David Prowse was spilling secrets and doing one dumb thing after another, but George kept hiring him. So then the question becomes, there's a gut-wrenching moment in the 6th episode, spoiler alert, mute your TV or whatever, but spoiler. There's a moment in our 6th episode where Marcia's crying and she tells this story about, she's in a bookstore and she sees a book about the 25th anniversary of Lucasfilm, and she flips to the end of the book in the glossary and her name has one number. Like John Dykstra, who George Lucas also did not get along with. John Dykstra had 50 numbers. Dennis Muren had 300 numbers. So she goes to the page number connected to the number next to her thing, and the only mention of her in the entire book is like her name was on a poster that was on one of the pages. But I get it. I've had breakups with girls that tore my heart out. Like, I don't think it was a deliberate thing out of anger to hide her contributions. Maybe it was. Maybe I'm naive. I don't know. But I think this was a hurt man by a woman that left him, and that's how he reacted. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not defending it, but I get it. I understand it.
Can I ask a question? Do you think that the story of the prequels, which, the story of the love of Anakin and Padme and where that went, do you think somehow that story was influenced by that breakup in some subtle way? There's something in the prequels that was not necessarily about Marcia Lucas, but about the hurt that George felt.
100% yes. But, and again, not that this is what you're asking, but I will say it again. That's the flaw of the prequels. That it should have been about Ahsoka and Anakin, and not this bizarre ritualistic Jedi. You can't have a girlfriend. Like what? Like, of course, that's going to drive people insane.
Right. Let's go through a lot of comments here. They're just flying fast. John Witchboy says some visionaries need partners to ground them.
And most have.
Yeah. Cody Eichholt says, this is the coolest Film Threat interview ever.
Woo!
Which is great. And then Dempsey asks, were there any questions you wanted to ask but didn't for whatever reason? You talked for 6 hours.
No, absolutely not. And, I always have our other producers and research staff on interviews like that, watching via laptop and Zoom. So as soon as I finished, I always turn to the laptop and I go, what'd I miss? And then they asked a bunch of questions that I missed or didn't think of. So when we were in post, not once did we say to ourselves, oh, we should have asked that, or, oh, I wish I had asked that. And the other thing I always pat myself on the back on, because it is hard, is when you're doing an interview and you ask a question and they don't really answer it, I always try very hard to be like, listen, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you did not answer the question. And you try again. And that's very hard to do because it destroys the rhythm of the interview. You're kind of being an asshole, even though you're not. So, and I did that with her a fair amount where she would answer and her information was usually great, but she kind of missed what I had asked. So I would say to her, I'm sorry, Marsha, that's great, but would you mind? Here's the question again. And she answered everything. She didn't take the fifth once.
So more comments here. Girthy Guitar says, I have a few Star Wars Lucasfilm books, and she's only there because she got the Oscar. A Maggot says, I had no idea of her involvement. Henry Back to Play says, all diehard Star Wars fans need to see this. Kara says, Marsha was hidden. I learned about her involvement only a few years ago. And someone asked here real quick, Trav 101, are you planning on doing another season of The Movies That Made Us?
All I can legally say, and I don't blame you for wanting to punch me, but all I can say is stay tuned. And I would tell you honestly, if the answer was no, I would tell you. But
Okay.
All I can tell you is stay tuned.
Great. And then
God forbid I said yes, I know. But yes, all I can do is say stay tuned.
Portland 182 asks, says Marsha's input was diminished when George recut the movie with different effects and had John Williams rescore the Battle of Yavin. I don't know if that's true. Brian, what do you think? I mean, I do know that what George did, which he didn't do, and I feel like this is such a great filmmaking lesson. When they recut, like they basically cut the Battle of Yavin, right? The Death Star attack on the Death Star, all that. And then they recut stuff to match the score so that the cuts fit the music perfectly. And when I actually had the opportunity to interview Gary Kurtz years ago and asked him when the special editions came out, he was very polite. He wouldn't say anything bad about George or the movies. He was very polite. But on the special editions, Gary Kurtz's only comment was he didn't like the Battle of Yavin. He felt that the music cues were off because the way that it was recut. He said the music doesn't match what's happening on screen, which is why I can't watch the special edition. I have the despecialized editions, which you can get on Blu-ray somewhere. I have those and they're incredible. It takes me right back to when I first saw the movies, but I don't know what your comment is on this. I think you probably have more insight.
By the way, I'll see you and raise you on your Blu-rays. I got my VHS and my VCR still plugged in and ready to roll.
Oh, good.
And those are my tapes from when I was a kid. So I'll see you and raise you. I don't even know what that means. I know it's a gambling thing, but I think I used it properly. Here's the thing. And again, this is another spoiler. So everybody put your phones on mute or whatever. Lucas made the re-releases to pay for Phantom Menace. That's why those movies exist. So you can say whatever you want to say. He did this, he did that, he did this, he did that. It's all true, it's all not true, whatever. The reason he made those movies was for two purposes, both to the same aim. One, raise the money to pay for Phantom Menace, and then hopefully the profit from Phantom Menace would pay for the next two, which it did. Number two, continue to perfect the technology that was developed. This is the other thing that most people don't know. Let me ask you this. You're both Star Wars, huge diehard fans. Who would you say is the godfather, the unofficial nephew, the distant cousin? So not the father, not the grandfather, not the mother, not the grandmother. Who's the distant aunt and uncle of Phantom Menace?
I don't know.
That makes me happy. It is the young Indiana Jones Chronicles. The only reason that show exists was so that George could have somebody else write the check to figure out the technologies that would be used for Phantom Menace. But the problem was that was a TV show where they used a lot of shortcuts because the resolution of television is much lower than features. So a big part of why the re-releases happened was A, they were practicing the technology that would lead to Jar Jar and the battle droid army and all that stuff. And then also like I said earlier, to raise the money to pay for, even though he could have afforded it. He put out 3 movies. After the movie theaters took their piece, he probably did about 180 to 200 million profit. Taxes would remove half of that. And he was basically left with almost exactly the budget of what Phantom Menace cost to make. That's why those movies exist.
I've always felt that George Lucas, it was less about the storytelling for him, but more about progressing cinematic technology. If you think about it, Attack of the Clones was the first fully digitally shot film.
I believe it's a tie game for that topic. I do not believe he puts the technology over the storytelling, but I do believe they're unusually tied in that most directors would spend 98% of their energy on creative, 2% on technology. That's 99.9% of directors in the history of cinema over 100 years. And then there's George, and it was 50-50. People forget the guy invented Pixar, the guy invented Avid. Like some people know about Pixar. People don't realize in 2022, 75% of features are edited on something he created called Edit Droid. Which is the name Avid had before the people that bought it changed it to Avid. Which, by the way, Lucas forced on them. If he didn't do that, it still would have been called Edit Droid today. And again, you got to think about that. Here's a guy famous for a movie, but literally the companies he sold are going to be around for 100 years. Like, this guy did at least 3 things, at least, that will be around forever.
I would argue that George Lucas, if he never made a movie and just had all this technology, the innovation that he was a part of, even THX, remember when THX sound was, making its way into movie theaters? He upped the standards. I remember seeing the original Star Wars. I was there. I didn't see it on opening day, but I saw it opening weekend in May of 1977. I was a kid, went to see it. The marketing for the movie was terrible. I'm going to be honest. The trailer, I remember seeing a trailer late night, and I was into monster movies and science fiction movies, and I thought, oh, this is cool. The Wolfman is in this movie. I want to see the movie with the Wolfman. It was the tagline. It's about a boy, a girl, and a galaxy. Yeah. They didn't know what they were going to do. And I don't know if you talk about this, but I read this, that they tried to convince George to change the name of Star Wars to something else. Yeah. Because 20th Century Fox's focus testing said that people thought it was about celebrities fighting. And they try. He said, no, we're not gonna change the name. So to his credit, but like, and you go into this in the doc, which is fascinating, how much Lucas suffered physically. Yeah. He was hospitalized. He, like, getting to make it, and it's I've never seen anything about the making of Star Wars that went into such detail about, and stories I kind of only knew a part of, or stories I've never heard before, like just the physical toll it took on Lucas. He birthed this creatively in the world. And when you back it up, especially if you read The Secret History of Star Wars, just the development that went into the script, the years of that, the trying to get the rights to Flash Gordon and failing. And they've still, like, look, I love the Sam Jones Flash Gordon. I think it's fun and quaint. There hasn't been I'd love to see a Flash Gordon movie done right, but he suffered so much to just bring this to the world. I can't even imagine a world without Star Wars. It's weird. And it was in contrast to everything at the time. You actually do this in your doc series where you're showing, like, Nixon, the Vietnam War, like, movies were dark. This was like Taxi Driver and, and now we're talking earlier about Los Angeles, how it's become like Taxi Driver, or as I like to say, it's like Gotham City, but there's no Batman. Yep. Like, we're headed for some dark times now, but it was a really dark time, and Star Wars stood out in contrast. And you said this in the doc, and I'm so glad, or someone said it in the doc. He wanted to make a movie. I think it was Marcia Lucas. I want to make a movie for 10-year-old boys. Yeah, that's what started for 10-year-old boys. I want 10-year-old boys to like this movie. But Marcia was the one that wanted it. This is the thing that struck me. She convinced George, you got to take it seriously. And then it was it John Milius who's like, you got to get that Force thing out of there. Cut the Force out. anything about the Force. The Force is stupid.
It wasn't just him, man. Brian De Palma, all of them.
Yeah, Brian De
The only
Palma.
one who didn't say it was Spielberg.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. We've got some more questions and comments here. Daniel says, I haven't been able to get any work done. This interview is so damn chunky. Brian is a knowledge volcano.
I was like, is chunky good or bad? I have not seen it.
I think he's saying dense in terms of knowledge. Anonymous says editors and films rarely get much credit. Anyways, I think it's
Anonymous is 1,000% right. The accolades and attention that cinematographers get should be shared with editors. I'm not taking away from DPs. DPs are great and they do a wonderful thing, don't get me wrong. But editors should get equal credit. And I would actually argue, in my opinion, more credit, because the cinematography can suck, but if the writing and the editing is good, you can still have a hit film. The opposite is not true. There are so many movies that are the most beautiful looking film ever made, and they suck. They suck. No one watches them. So I completely agree with you, Anonymous, not to be confused with Anonymous.
I will say, I remember, if you recall, I saw Star Wars in its first run. There was that souvenir program guide that you could buy, the souvenir program guide. I remember the smell of the ink. The smell of the ink, because it was different than any other printed thing. It's like, why does this ink smell so specific? I saw Star Wars 7 times during that summer. The movie, I saw most in the theaters as a kid. And what I remembered about that program guide is it was the first time I recognized, and to give George a little bit of credit, you saw, like, here were all the actors, and then it gave you these little bios of the characters, and it talked about the people behind the scenes. And it was the thing that actually got me to buy and read magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland, which I was buying, Starlog magazine, Fantastic Films, all those great genre movie magazines. Like, just, you knew who people like John Dykstra was. They were promoted in the souvenir program guide. George Lucas was building not just, if you see early interviews with him, like he said, well, I want to build a toy company. He wanted to do a lot of things, but he was just this entrepreneur, innovator. And it was the first time I remember reading about people behind the scenes. I knew who George Lucas was as a kid. I didn't care necessarily about directors. I cared about, is Frankenstein in this? Is Godzilla in this? And it was once Star Wars hit, that got me interested in who was behind the scenes, who was responsible, and even what their stories were, right? Just getting there. There's so many comments. I don't know how much longer we have you for.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, so we'll get to just a couple quick questions here. I guess The Adventures of Starkiller Episode 1 Star Wars was too hard to market. Bunch of wimps. But let's and then here, SJ says, I think Marcia was very well known among industry professionals. I think that's true. She had the respect that mattered and the career, but she didn't have the spotlight glory. But after her and George broke up and went their separate ways, she was an outcast in the industry. And
no, I have to interrupt there. No, she was not. In her own words, she retired. There was nothing. And again, she could not have been more forthright with me. Absolutely not. She wanted to be a mom. She was burnt out. She was kind of bored. And she also said, to a certain extent, this is not in the show, but she said it, she was rich. And like, she was one of these people that, like, I'm making up numbers now. She did not say this, but like, I think if she had 10 million in the bank, she didn't care about having 11 million. Like 10 million was already more than she ever thought she would have. Think about it. She's a woman in a man's world in a job that never makes millionaires. And she's got millions and millions coming in every year for the rest of her life. So she walked away. It was all her. It was her decision. It was on her terms. She was beloved by everybody, especially George.
Well, thank you for that correction. I appreciate it. And Brian, thank you so much, not just for the Icons on Earth series, which you can see on Vice TV. Do not miss this. I hope that you do consider repurposing the Marsha Lucas interview
Yeah.
into a documentary just about her. Call it Marsha. That's all you got to, it's, and just you getting this interview. I've said for years, where is she? Please, like she needs to. And when she spoke out about, you know, her just thoughts on the current state of Star Wars, it was fantastic. And also just thank you for like what your company does, the Nacelle company. Like obviously you have fans in the chat, more comments than we have time to get to, but dude, the stuff that you put, I feel like the episode you did, The Toys That Made Us on Star Wars, where they talk about the development of the figures and the Jawa cape was a guy's sock that he cut out and just that just blew my mind. I had friends of mine just contact, have you seen this show? Have you seen this show? We're all watching it at the same time, discovering it. Just thank you for everything you and your company does. And congratulations. Just congratulations and thank you. You're a nerd like everybody here. I get that. And just, I recognize a lot of the models in the background behind you.
You say that, I'm really embarrassed. I'm moving for the first time in 7 years. Normally behind me looks like this.
Oh, wow. Oh, nice. Sweet.
So literally, like, it's like, this is like the only interview I'm doing ever in this state of movement. So this entire interview, I've been looking at that and I'm like horrified.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and the audience. We hope to have you back, and congrats on the show. I can't wait to see all the episodes.
I appreciate it. Let me know what you think.
Awesome. All right, take care. Thanks again.
Bye.
Later.